What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, well, the NFL draft is behind them. Rookie minicamp is this weekend, but there is plenty of talk about what the team should do next. And, well, they are still making headlines, and there's plenty to talk about as we move towards minicamp, OTAs, and eventually Latrobe. It's been a beautiful weekend here in the Berg, even if it's been a little rainy. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling good. Yeah, it was a beautiful weekend. I had a lot of fun this weekend. I was celebrating birthdays, graduations, lots of other stuff. So I had a good time this weekend. I'm excited to jump back into some Steelers football.
Beautiful times. Yeah, it was a celebratory weekend. I'm excited for everybody to see Nick here in a minute because he was celebrating at a wedding and decided to, just to make the most of his opportunity. We're going to start before we talk about some Najee Harris news and maybe a couple potential trades for the Pittsburgh Steelers as we move towards OTAs with a hypothetical that has hit the internet about the Pittsburgh Steelers acquiring DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks that may just be the wildest thing we have ever heard, and I think it's time to react. Nick, let's send it down to you.
John Bueller of Fansided had an interesting mock trade here, and I'll read it out for you guys and let you be the judge. In Bueller's trade scenario, the Steelers add DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2025 first-round pick, a 2025 third-round pick, a 2026 second-round pick, a 2026 fourth-round pick, and George Pickens, number one wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what do you guys think of that? I'll say mock trade and emphasis on the mock.
Emphasis on the mock for sure. I think we should do a whole podcast just staring at the mustache. Phenomenal mustache. Told you before the show. Very thankful that you kept that one for at least a couple days here as we do the podcast. Steven, let's talk to you. What's your thoughts on a wild mock trade there?
Yeah, Nick kept reading off draft pick after draft pick, and honestly, those didn't really bother me as much. DK Metcalf's a good player. You got to give up something to get him. But once you got to George Pickens, I was all the way out. I mean, that completely defeats the purpose of trading for a wide receiver in the first place. I mean, the problem is that the Steelers don't have enough, let's call it starting caliber wide receivers. So trading away one of your only wide receiver with starting experience on the roster. I mean, not the only one, but I'm not sure I consider Van Jefferson or Quez Watkins surefire starters just yet, or really at all. So trading away George Pickens, I think, completely defeats the purpose of this trade at all. You're just in the same spot. Maybe you did upgrade at number one receiver, but you didn't upgrade enough to make up for the fact that you still don't have a number two. You're not sure if you even have a number three, quite honestly. So, this doesn't really make sense at all to me. I mean, and that on top of 4 draft picks, including a first rounder and a second rounder, doesn't make much sense to me. And I don't see any reason why the Steelers would propose this or why they would even think about getting rid of George Pickens at all.
No. I think the line is drawn at George Pickens. I don't think there's any world where the Pittsburgh Steelers go, you know what? Yeah, we're going to get rid of George. We feel good about getting rid of George. That he's the reason we got rid of Deontay, but we're going to get rid of George. We feel really good about that. DK's here for 2 years and then everything's fine. It just makes absolutely literally zero sense. And I get it. DK Metcalf is probably an upgrade over George Pickens, but he's still older. He's 4 times as expensive, and you're going to give up a first, a second, a third, and a fourth to get him over the next 2 years, which is just not a move the Pittsburgh Steelers ever make, let alone for a wide receiver. That's just not in the realm of possibilities. I would say this goes down pretty easily as the wildest trade scenario I have seen of the offseason. And there's been some crazy ones. And there's been some big names. We're talking multiple first-round picks for Brandon Ayuk, maybe a first-round pick for Deebo Samuel. We've talked, quarterbacks. At one point, Justin Fields was going for a first-round pick. We were feeling really, really good about it. Even if you took away everything, even if you said just George Pickens, DK Metcalf straight up, I'd still be like, I just don't think the Steelers would be interested in making that move, just because George Pickens is a lot cheaper. He's younger. And let's not act like George Pickens doesn't have DK Metcalf upside if everything works out in his favor over the next 2 years. Definitely a wild one. Would you rank it the wildest of the offseason?
Probably. I mean, I'm trying to think of something we've talked about that has been even crazier, and I'm sure there was. but I can't think of one that immediately struck me as making less sense for the Steelers than this one.
Yes.
It doesn't solve any of your needs. I think it makes you, I guess, not necessarily worse next year, but you are mortgaging your future for a marginal upgrade at number one wide receiver. Like this
Yep.
is, you compare their stats from last year. George Pickens had a really good year last year without much help from his quarterback or from his scheme, or from anyone else really. I mean, he was also doing it when Deontay Johnson was out and he was getting double teamed and triple teamed all the time. Like, to talk about George Pickens having DK Metcalf upside is not ridiculous at all. We all, I think, can see the similarities in play style. Like, George Pickens is good, man, and giving him up straight up for DK Metcalf all by itself still doesn't, like you said, make a ton of sense. And you throw in 4 future draft picks, and it just makes even less sense. It's just like the idea that you would throw George Pickens on top of an already insanely generous package of draft picks is completely insane to me. I don't know why. Like, Nick just kept going, and I was like, okay, maybe it's still kind of a lot. And then once George Pickens was in there, I was like, oh, you should have started with that. You should have led with that, because that would have taken me out immediately.
Yeah. The way I read it when I first read it yesterday, 2 days ago or something like that, George Pickens was the front of this draft trade, and I went, oh, okay, there's no point in reading the rest of it. This is fine. But that's where we are. It's wild to see. No, thank you. I mean, the Seattle Seahawks be all over it, but the Pittsburgh Steelers, never a chance. There would never. You couldn't get Omar Khan. You couldn't hold Omar Khan hostage and say he's going to make that trade. Would never happen.
That's the other thing. Like, Omar Khan, who famously loves to give up draft picks, like, he's the one who's like acquiring them. He's the one who's getting these guys in trade. The idea that he would overpay for a guy like DK Metcalf doesn't make any sense. And that's the thing. This just doesn't even follow like logical steps that the Steelers usually take. This isn't in their character. This isn't something that they do regularly. So I don't know where the kind of gear started turning and where this kind of came from.
No chance. There are a couple of trades that may make sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think it's a good opportunity to talk about them. With Najee Harris's news coming on Friday that the team declined his 5th-year option, making 2024 the last year on his current deal, there's all this speculation about whether or not this is the end of Najee Harris, or if Jaylen Warren's going to be the starter, or what's going to happen in Pittsburgh over the next year, 12-month span. The speculation about him being traded has kind of ramped up since then, about the possibility that there are teams who need a running back. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys are probably the biggest one that I have seen or heard about over the last 2 or 3 days. The possibility of him being traded seems to be getting higher and higher. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, are you considering a trade if someone calls? I'm not saying they're actively out there looking for a trade, but if teams are calling saying, hey, is Najee Harris available? Are you saying yes?
I mean, I think if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, if I'm trying to put myself in their shoes, I've already made a statement about positional value. I've already made a statement about what I think of Najee Harris's value.
Yeah.
By not picking up his 5th-year option. Again, we talked about it before, but it's a cheap deal for a guy who's been super productive. They obviously think that they can replace Najee Harris with Jaylen Warren, and that's fine. I think that's an opinion that makes sense.
Yep.
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can understand where the logic comes from. If that's the way that you're thinking, then you have to pick up the phone when a trade call comes in. Like, you don't do something like this, I think, unless you're willing to deal Najee Harris. And I'm not sure what kind of value they'd get back from him. I don't think you'd get anything more than maybe a 3rd-round pick. Maybe you get 2 picks if you're lucky, but it's clear that they don't value Najee very highly, and I don't think any team would respond to them with a trade offer that's particularly high value by extension. If this team doesn't really value this guy that they drafted in the 1st round not too long ago, who's done everything they asked of him, who's been successful and productive, why would any other team respond with, oh, we're going to unload this massive package for you? That doesn't make any sense to me. But I think the Steelers have kind of tipped their hand a little bit. I think they kind of shown that they are open to a trade for him, that they are not including him in their future plans. I know there was talk of maybe extending him if he plays well this season, but I don't know if there's anything that Najee Harris could reasonably show you this season that would change their mind, and that would make them pay even more than what he would have gotten on his 5th-year option. So I think they've already moved on from Najee Harris and their future plans, and But to that end, you'd rather trade him for something than let him walk for nothing.
Yep, exactly. I've seen hypotheticals where he gets dealt for 4th-round pick, sometimes a 5th-round pick, and that seems like nothing. But at the same time, like if you're just going to let him walk in a year, if you think Jaylen Warren is the guy, because there are all these speculations. There's ESPN tossing out that they believe that Najee Harris's play is going to decline in 2024, and this is the end of Najee Harris. And if they really believe that, if the Steelers are sitting around thinking we're pretty positive Najee's going to eventually just fall off a cliff production-wise, then why not? What's a 4th-round pick for a guy that isn't going to add much value to your team by the end of the season, or a 5th-round pick for a guy who's not going to add much value by the end of the season? I think it makes a lot of sense. I think if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers and you're sitting here saying, we have a good running back in Jaylen Warren who could be a starter, I mean, what's stopping them from trying to find another guy? Or what's stopping them from just adding another guy? You know, Cordero Patterson is a good, versatile player. If you want to make him your number 2 running back, I mean, I think that works out just fine for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you got to go find a number 3, like I don't think that you're taking a massive step backwards. I'm saying this. I think Najee Harris has still got a lot left in the tank. I still think that if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, it makes a lot of sense to pick up that 5th-year option. I don't know if I would have made the same choice that the Steelers did. And if I had to bet on whether or not Najee's going to make more than $6 million next year, I'd probably say yes. But if you're the Steelers and you think this is the end and this is coming to nothing, what's the difference between Najee Harris and Cordero Patterson? Like, I don't think there is much, you know, and if that's the case, trade him.
That's where I kind of disagree with you. I think there's a big step back from Cordell Patterson.
I'm not saying
Harris.
I think that. I'm just saying the Steelers think that. If the Steelers think Najee's going to fall off a cliff production-wise, what's the difference between that and Cordero Patterson?
Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes much more sense, yeah. Yeah, like I said, they've tipped their hand. They've shown what they think of Najee Harris, and it's clear I don't think they have a very high opinion of him.
No.
I don't agree with that at all, but yeah, I mean, if you don't think that Najee is going to be the same guy that he's been, then I guess it makes sense not to invest that money in him. I guess you pick up Cordell Patterson for a reason. I don't think they would have gone and gotten a veteran if they had planned on keeping Najee Harris around for a while. I think that's where you would have invested some draft capital or signed, you know, a better undrafted free agent or something like that. They just clearly don't think that they can rely on him into the future. So I don't know, just to me, it's kind of like get it over with now. Like, he's not going to have trade value, I think, as much during the season as he is going to right now. I mean, I think you can sell a ton of teams on his potential. Like you said, the Cowboys really need a running back. I think you could, just thinking about Najee Harris with the Cowboys, I think that's a very easy sell, and that's a very easy way to say, think about how productive Najee could be in that offense.
Yes.
But, yeah, I think if you're going to do this, you got to do it, or you should do it sooner rather than later, you know?
Yes.
I'm not saying, I don't think you should drag it out into the season or even get it close to training camp, because then I think things just also get ugly, and also you lose a little bit of leverage if, you know, you show up to training camp and Najee is talking about how, you know, he's a little pissed off that they didn't pick up his option or voices any kind of displeasure, then you kind of get into a stickier situation. Then he looks disgruntled and his trade value kind of drops.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people out there that believe that that's going to be the case. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I'm not going to speculate on that. And just if you're looking to replace him, you know, I think that that's the biggest step is, okay, Cordell Patterson, but that's only 2 running backs. What are you going to do from there? There's still a couple of names out here that like make a decent bit of sense for the Steelers if they're just like, hey, look, we need a number 2 that we're willing to take a shot on. I mean, Damian Harris is still out there, productive running back the last couple of years. Cam Akers, who's only 24 years old, productive when he's healthy. Yeah, right? There are names out here. Latavius Murray, if you're going to go old but reliable. Jerick McKinnon. I mean, Marlon Mack, if you're going to take a shot on somebody. Josh Kelly's still out there. I mean, worst case scenario, Kareem Hunt's still on the board. Like, you could find a name.
if that's your worst case scenario, that's, yeah.
It's not bad. Like, I think that the Steelers have options if they want to just say, hey, screw it, we'll just get a number 2. Like, these are guys that at some point in the season will play football and probably get snaps worth talking about for some team. And if the Steelers say, hey, look, we can get some value now, I mean, why not? Would I do it? No. But I would have picked up his 5th-year option, and I would have handled the whole situation differently. But where we are now, no. I think it's a possibility.
I agree with you, and I think it's pretty clear at this point we don't always see eye to eye with the Steelers. We don't always think the same way as Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin and the rest of the front office.
No. And I mean, to some degree, that makes sense. We would have traded a first-round pick for Justin Fields. They got him first, sixth. Right. So it works out in their favor a lot of times, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think this time is a shot that I think I would have taken if I was Pittsburgh. There's another trade out there. Ari Miroff of the 33rd team, NFL Insider, big name on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, said that if he had to take a shot, if he had to take a guess at the guy that will be traded or cut from the Steelers, the surprise that may not be so surprising, it's Dan Moore Jr., currently the starting left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've talked about this a couple of times, but I think now that it's happened, now that Troy Fautanu is in the building, the Steelers feel really good about where their tackle is. I mean, is it time to move on from Dan Moore Jr. if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, a guy that as of right now is the starter, but I find it really hard to believe that you're going to walk into 2024 after using back-to-back first-round picks and hunting for a Super Bowl and say Dan's going to start week 1. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but by that same vein, it's hard for me to imagine them being comfortable with Troy starting week 1 too. I mean, I get it. He's a little bit more refined of a project or a prospect than Broderick was, but even Broderick had to wait a pretty long while. I mean, it wasn't until November that they were comfortable sliding him in as a starting left tackle full-time, or starting right tackle, full-time. So I'm hesitant to say that they would be really comfortable with throwing Troy out there to start right away, but I see what you're saying. I think if they do get to the point where they're comfortable with that, I'm fine with trading Dan Moore. Thing is, you just got to make sure you got to move quickly to find someone who could be a swing tackle, who could be a backup, because you're extremely thin without someone in that position, without a Dan Moore to even fill at least one spot as a backup. I get it. That's not ideal because you can only play really on one side of the line, but man, you need something to back you up. And I guess that's easier to do than to find a starter. It's easier to do that than to keep, 2 tackles that can only play one side of the line there. So that's my only concern is just don't wait until training camp to do this. Don't wait till training camp to certainly find a replacement for Dan Moore. If you're going to trade him, there has to be a backup plan somewhere. There has to be, because that's the other thing. I think you can't walk into training camp assuming that Troy is going to be ready to go from day one.
I agree.
So I that's what the only reason I'm hesitant to trade Dan Moore. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really going to end up mattering. Like, Troy's going to be your starter. Troy's going to be your starter when the season really gets going and it matters. And that's why I'm more in on a Dan Moore trade than I guess I was when I first heard it. Yeah.
So I agree. I think right now is a little bit jumping the gun. I think you gotta figure everything out before you just say, hey, okay, this is where, you know what I mean? You get ahead of the game, you fall for some impulses, and next thing you know, you're kind of struggling because you just don't have the pieces in place to replace him. And Dan Moore might not be a long-term starter in the NFL. He might not be a guy that's going to make much impact. He might be your worst offensive starter on the offensive line. That's a real possibility. But you don't know what you have in Troy yet. You got to figure that out. I think that Troy will come in here and impress and be the instant starter. I don't think there's much worry there or concern there for me, but you have to see it. You can't just guess. You have to see it. And on top of that, I think you have to see what you got in Spencer Anderson before you make a move for Dan Moore. Like, is Spencer ready to go? Is he ready to be your swing tackle? Is he ready to be the backup? Like, is he ready to be the reporting eligible tackle? If that's the case and you see that early, cool, make a move. There's no reason not to make a move. You have Dylan Cook as your fourth, and I think that they actually like Dylan Cook and what he could become because he's still relatively new to the position. But you have to see if your pieces are in place before you make a move. Because if this was a backup, it'd be different. If this was Dan and Chuk still around, I think that that's a totally different scenario. Get rid of one of them immediately because there's no point in having 2. But right now, you're going to take a shot in the dark that Spencer Anderson's ready to go and be your primary backup. And if he's not, then you have to have somebody there. Even if Dan Moore is not a swing tackle, and that's what everybody wants to talk about. He's not a swing tackle. Yes, but Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones could play both sides. And if you find yourself in a position where you need Dan Moore to step in as a starter, you can move the other one to the right tackle position if need be. That's not the end of the world for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not ideal for a swing tackle, which is why you'd rather Spencer Anderson work out. But it's still a possibility and maybe a better one if Spencer Anderson isn't ready to go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. But I also think you know, I don't think it'll be hard to find a swing tackle somewhere else. Either in the free agent
Yeah.
market. Like there are a bunch of tackles that are still unsigned as we get into May and we approach the start of the summer. So I don't think it'd be difficult to find a swing tackle, to even find someone who maybe has some starting experience or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, what kind of value do you think they would get in a Dan Moore trade? Because
Uh,
I can't imagine it'd be very high. It'd be would it be? It, is he worth more than a Kevin Dotson or a Kendrick Green?
I mean, I think more than a Kendrick Green trade. I think they got a
Yeah.
6th round for Kendrick. I think they got a 5th
Yeah, it was
for
only
Kevin
fifth.
Dotson.
Yeah,
Yeah. I could see a 5th round for Dan Moore. I could see a 5th rounder. Maybe a 4th, a conditional 4th, maybe like a conditional 5th that if he plays and ends up starting, it turns into a 4th, something like that. He started every game he's ever played in the NFL, and he's been reliable. And I think that, no matter what, this guy is somebody that is going to make a roster. He's not going to phase out of the NFL. He's going to be here for a little while. He's a good, reliable backup. He's going to have to learn to play both sides, but if you could bring him in and try to make the most of him, I think it could work out. I could see a 5th round. I think the most you'd get for him is a 4th, depending on how urgent things are. That's my thing about trading him right now, is that I think that his value increases in training camp.
Yeah.
I think that right now you have a bunch of teams who are optimistic about their team. Come training camp, you have a bunch of teams who are worried about their team. So if that's the case, make a trade during training camp, and you're probably going to get more than what you would get if you traded them right now, because you're just looking to get rid of them and everybody knows it.
yeah, absolutely. I think I was going to make that same point. Is that right now everyone is selling themselves on potential.
Yes.
Everyone's potential, everyone's ceiling is still in play right now. Once you get to training camp, once guys get hurt, once guys actually show what they're capable of on the field, not everyone's meeting their potential. That's just math. That's just how it works. So that's when you start to get, teams that are a little more desperate, teams that might say, hey, we need an upgrade here, we need a fail-safe plan here. That's where his value might go up. Because I think that was true with Kevin Dotson especially. And I think Kendrick Green too, to a certain extent. We were talking about a potential Kendrick Green trade, and we're like, man, I don't even know what you could get for him. The market would be so thin, and then all of a sudden, a team has a few offensive linemen go down, they have a need, and the Steelers have a solution, and Kendrick Green moves on, he ends up getting an opportunity and making the most of it. And I think that was the same thing with Kevin Dotson. A team faced with a ton of injuries, they need whatever they can get, and the Steelers can reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to find it happens every year, with every single position. You could trade literally anybody during training camp and get more value than what you thought you were going to get for them, just because guys get injured all the time, and other teams are just like, we need somebody. Screw it, we need anybody, we'll take them. That's why Kenny Pickett's going for, or Justin Fields goes for nothing right now. But if you traded him during training camp to a team that needed a quarterback, that's a 2nd round pick. You're going to get massive return for a Justin Fields later in the offseason, or anybody. We're talking, Mason Rudolph's been the hottest name for years on the quarterback trade market, and he's never gone anywhere. And I could imagine they probably would have got something crazy for him, for a team that needed a backup when Mason was available. And I think that might hold true with Najee too. You might find out that Dallas isn't in on Zeke and all their other running backs stink, and they need somebody. Well, Najee Harris is here. Let's call and see if Najee's available. Boom. Let's make a trade. We'll see what happens. I think it holds true for everybody. The more urgent you are, the better. Speaking of trades, and we've talked about 2 of them, let's talk about a 3rd here. There's another name on the wide receiver market that's been tossed out there a couple of times now for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've mentioned it a little bit here and there, but we haven't really dove into it as heavily as maybe we should have. And now that things are heating up over there, it kind of feels like it's a more realistic possibility here. So Trey Burks of the Tennessee Titans is just a guy who's going to come off the bench in Tennessee and contribute and hope to turn into something a little bit more than he has so far. But this offseason, the Titans have added Calvin Ridley. They are reportedly in on Tyler Boyd, bringing him in for a visit last week, and then hoping to get a deal done soon, kind of leaving Treylon Burks on the outside looking in when it comes to their depth chart. The Steelers, on the other hand, are looking for a number 2, maybe a number 3. Burks might be that number 3 for them. You're looking at that as an option for the Steelers if the Titans are looking to trade him?
I actually like this one. I don't think this one is a terrible idea. I mean, I when I initially heard it, I was like, no way. This guy's done nothing in his NFL career. I don't. But Traylon Burks, actually, when you dig a little deeper, he's still really young. He's only 24 years old, former first-round pick. And when I'm looking at potential options for the Steelers as far as receivers, I feel like there are a few boxes that they need to check. Need to be able to play on the outside. They need to be able to run block. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much the only two things. It's like you need to be able to run block, and you need to be able to play on the outside. And I think Traylon Burks checks both of those boxes. He took a bit of a step back last year in terms of production. It just didn't seem like he was as involved, but I think there's some, I remember my third thing. Got to be able to push the ball downfield. And I think Traylon Burks can do that. I think if nothing else, Traylon Burks can be a bit of a deep threat for you. And I think that's how he would kind of fit into Arthur Smith's offense. I think he can do those things. And I know you're kind of banking more on potential than anything else here, but I think that potential is there. I mean, if he was able to replicate his 2022 season, which in only 11 games, he had almost 450 yards, he had a touchdown. If you can basically get that or the same rate of production per game as he did during his rookie season, I think you'd be absolutely happy with that. I don't think this guy would cost you a whole lot, and what he would cost you, I think, would be worth it to fill a wide receiver 2 role. I think that helps, Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin fit better into slot roles, which I think they'll be better at. And I think just it might only be a placeholder. It's not a super sexy signing. It's not something that's going to make anyone crazy excited, but I think it'd be solid, and I think it would make the Steelers better, and I think the trickle down effect of helping everyone else kind of fit into their positions a little bit better would really help.
Yeah, I think it's just an upgrade over what you got so far. Like if you're right now, your fourth wide receiver is Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins. Worst case scenario, Traylon Burks a better Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins, or at least has the upside to be. And you could look at him and say, there were moments last year where he looked good. I mean, he looked good against Pittsburgh Steelers at times. And he doesn't have to be a number 2, but he could be your outside guy while Roman Wilson's your inside guy, and has the ability to play both inside and outside, and allows you to do better things with Calvin Austin. Like, that's all they're looking for. People are talking about you need another starter. You need another starter. You do need another starter, but your degree of what you need out of that starter isn't as massive as people are making it out to be. Like, you could look at a Traylon Burks and say, come in here, develop, be a reliable set of hands for Russell Wilson, which is what they're looking for, and allow everybody else to mesh better without having to pull everybody thin. Like if right now Roman Wilson's got to be your outside and your inside guy, Calvin Austin's got to be more of a wide receiver than a gadget guy, Van Jefferson's got to play way more than he should. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. You bring in one more piece to the puzzle who's got the ability to start. You could look at that and say, okay, cool. Now Roman Wilson could do what he does best. Now Calvin Austin could do what he does best. Now we don't have to put guys like Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins on the field more than they need to be on the field. It makes everything else better. I think Burks makes sense. I also think Burks would be so crazy cheap. Like, I think that you could get Burks for a 5th-round pick, maybe a 4th-round. Man, I think a 4th would be pushing it. I think you could get him for a 5th-round pick, probably before training camp, especially after they sign. Like, if they sign Tyler Boyd, which there's like some optimism that they're going to, Traylon Burks could be a guy that's on the market in 24 hours. And if that's the case, who cares? Just get him for a 5th-round pick. They're looking to get rid of him. They're just looking for something for him. And then, boom, you have your guy. And I'd feel really good about that. And it would shut down the urgency or the need to continue to talk to San Francisco and possibly find yourself giving up more than you should, or Seattle giving up more than you should, or whoever. If you get Burks for cheap, boom, you just solved your problem. You did it for a little bit of exchange or compensation, and you don't put yourself in a hole anymore.
That's the thing. Yeah, you said, they need a starter, but they don't really need a star, I don't think.
No.
I think they have their star. I think you're banking on Roman Wilson being really underrated and giving you some great things as a number 2.
Yes.
So I don't think this is crazy. I don't think bringing in Burks to be at worst a wide receiver 3 is a bad move at all. And so I totally agree that he's going to be cheap. He's not a guy that's going to break the bank for you, and it kind of ends all the speculation about all these headaches about, having to call San Francisco, having them shut down rumors, having rumors come back up and everything like that. everyone can just kind of settle down. They can focus on the football, and just everything gets much more simple if you make this move and you just plug this hole right now.
Yeah, and I think it kind of has a trickle-down effect where if you add a wide receiver now, you get that over with, you could start working on the Najee Harris and the Dan Moore if those things become available, because you don't want to trade Najee Harris before you get another wide receiver, because you're limiting yourself offensively, and you just don't want to do that. You get another wide receiver, you feel good about the passing game, cool. Now we could adjust the running game because there's not such a dire need to rely so heavily on the running game. You know, I just think you could focus more on getting more for Dan Moore. I just think it has a trickle-down effect where you could start working on a little bit of everything. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think if we're talking realistic possibilities, I think Burks is very high up there compared to some of those names.
Yeah, that's the thing. We've kind of had to come back down to earth after, Ayuk gets taken off the table. Sutton and Deebo Samuel get taken off the table as well. We had high expectations, but I think we're all kind of readjusting and saying, all right, this is the reality now for the Steelers. They are probably not going to get another superstar, so you got to make do with what's available. And as far as, like you said, realistic options, Burks is a pretty good one.
Yeah. I think he might be top of the list as we move forward, at least when it comes to realistic possibilities. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at si.com/NFL/Steelers. We will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.